In this video, we're gonna do an entire mix from start to finish using Xvox. Take a listen to where we're gonna start and where we're gonna end up. Obviously, it's a massive difference going from a completely unmixed track to a final mix. But let's break it down and go step by step through the entire process so I can show you how I got there. So with this session, I've already done 20 or 30 minutes worth of work on it. Just organizing, color coding, making sure all my tracks were named properly and laid out easily so that when I get into actually mixing the track, I can just be thinking about the mix and not worrying about finding which vocals go together. It's all laid out and easy. So here's the 3 things I recommend doing before you even start mixing. First, set up markers for the arrangement of your track. It allows you to just quickly flip to different sections of your track. And when you're mixing, you might just want to loop the chorus, for example. This will allow you to do that super easily. Number 2 is to organize your tracks. I like to color code and place them in an order that makes sense for me, but it's really just about however you like to set it up so that you can easily navigate through the session. Again, it might not seem like it really matters that much, but it helps you stay in the creative flow when you're actually mixing. Number 3, and probably the most important, is to edit all your tracks before you start mixing. You want to take care of all the breaths and mouth clicks, cut out any big areas of silence, just so that your track is nice and clean. You can see where all the waveforms are. Again, we want to clear out as much of this kind of work as possible before we get into the mix. That way we can just stay creative and stay thinking about the sonics and how things are working from a creative standpoint. So in this session, we've got a 2-track beat. All of our backgrounds here.
Done thinking.
And obviously we've got our leads.
You say not to think about it.
The first thing we're going to do is set our levels to a pretty good rough spot. So what I like to do is I like to mute everything except for the leads and the beat.
You say not to think about it. All I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it. But all I do is worry about you.
I'm kind of listening to all the different elements in the track, and I'm kind of comparing it to the vocals. Things that stick out to me are the snare, the clap. Does it sound like it's way louder than the vocal? If it does, then the vocal's probably not loud enough. At the same time, if all of a sudden I can't hear, the guitar in the mix because the vocals are so loud, then probably it needs to come down. So I'm just trying to hear everything clearly. I want the vocal up front, so I'm not afraid to turn it up. I'm not afraid for it to be loud, but I want to make sure I can still hear all the track. So let me give you a couple examples. I'm comparing the clap and the vocal, and the clap is like really clear, really loud, and the vocal is like buried underneath of it. So the vocal's too quiet.
But I never seem to win without you. I won't waste another moment. Cause I'm over waiting on you.
As I turn it up here, I'm thinking, how's the vocal sound with the little like plucked guitar string thing that's happening?
But all I do is worry about you. I try to fight it, but I never seem to win.
It's getting hard to hear that element. It's getting hard to hear. So I'm just going to kind of tuck it in the middle there.
But all I do is worry about you. I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. I won't waste another moment.
So now it feels generally pretty good. Now remember, we're just working very broad strokes here. We're not trying to dial it in perfectly yet. We're just trying to get it in the right ballpark. Then once I've got the lead and the track feeling good together, then I'll kind of unmute all the rest of my vocals and just fill them in, again, very broadly. We're just bringing them all up together just to kind of get them generally in the right spot.
But all I do is worry about you. I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. I won't waste another moment. Cause I'm over waiting on you. If you're not in the moment, if you're not with the things that.
So with the background vocals, I'm typically thinking like it should be under the lead and it should be kind of between the lead and the beat. It should kind of glue it all together. This level generally does that. It's not perfect. It's not how it's going to be in the end, but it gets me kind of close. One really important thing that I'm looking at constantly as I'm doing this is the master meters. I'm looking to make sure that we're not peaking on those master meters.
But all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight.
And that might mean turning your beat down a little bit, turning everything down a little bit. You just want to make sure you're not peaking on those meters.
But all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight. But I never seem to win without.
So the next step in my process is to put on just a basic limiter. You can see it's not really doing that much. It's maybe adding just a little bit of gain, a little bit of glue to the overall mix. So the next part of my process is I'm going to start getting some vocal tones. I'm going to load up Xvox on this lead vocal, and let's just flip to the verse.
You make me want it.
Right now, I'm just getting general tones. I'm not tweaking, I'm not perfecting, I'm not dialing in. But in a way, this is actually one of the most important times in the mix process because this is where I'm making the creative decisions. What do I want this vocal to feel like? Do I want it to be super present? Do I want it to be super spacey? This is the part of the process where I'm making those decisions. So I'll start with compression. Compression on a vocal is so important to get right because if you over compress, all of a sudden your vocal is going to sound completely squashed. It's going to sound smaller and kind of tucked away in the track, and you're going to kind of take all the life out of it. At the same time, if you under compress, you're going to be left with a very dynamic vocal that's just going to be kind of popping in and out, and it's going to be really hard to get the level right. Luckily with Xvox, the compressors let you go from, just tapping the peaks to super compressed and smashed. And you have a lot of granular control over that. Let's just listen as we turn this compression up, see what it's doing.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out.
What I like about the workflow with Xvox here is that I can stay in the creative headspace instead of having to flip between technical, creative, as I'm setting my compression amount. If you've used traditional compressors, you know it's a lot of getting it exactly right and then stepping back and listening and then deciding, oh, you know what, I need some more compression, go back in, be technical, figure out how to get that, step back, listen again. So it's a lot of flipping back and forth. Here, I'm just staying in the creative headspace and I'm just twisting this knob and thinking, what sounds right? Does it sound like the right amount of compression for this vocal?
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me want.
Behind the scenes, Xvox is taking care of all the technical stuff. It's taking care of, do you want to catch the peaks? Do you want to slam it? It's, putting together a smooth gradient for me to kind of flip between and figure out what I want.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out.
Once I get the compression generally where I think it should be, in this case I think somewhere between 40 and 50% maybe, I'll kind of dial this trim back just to level match it a little better.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You did.
I'm generally looking for between 6 and 12 dB of gain reduction on this compressor. That's generally what I find works pretty well. So now you're like, okay, I've got the right amount of compression. Now I just want to swap out different compressors and see what it sounds like if I completely change all the compressors. It's very easy to do with Xvox. Let's just try out some different modes.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You take me for granted.
So you can see the benefit of this workflow. It's as if I had set up 2 compressors, got them all set up perfectly, then set up 2 different compressors, got them exactly as I want, and then set up 2 more, got them exactly right, level matched between all 6 of these compressors, and then am flipping between them instantaneously to pick which one I like the tone of and the feel of best. And I'm doing it in a single click.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out.
So what I hear is opto and FET is natural, transparent, smooth. It's a very good sounding compressor. VCA and FET is more aggressive, it's more punchy, it's kind of bringing some energy to the vocal in a nice way. Tube and Fet is very warm, it's very gluey, it's kind of saturated in a nice way, and it just brings a different shape to the vocal.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it, want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out.
In this particular case, I like Opto and Fet. Now, I might change my mind for the chorus or the pre-chorus, and I might change it up later, but I want just kind of a natural, smooth compressor.
You make me want it, the way that you got.
So I'm feeling good about the dynamics. I'll just kind of A/B it by itself to just make sure.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it.
Next, I'm going to move on to the tone. Now, with the tone, we could go any direction we want to. With this track, I think a pop, super airy, super bright, it matches the beat very well. If I was to hear this song on a playlist next to other similar artists, this is what I'd want to hear.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it, want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You take me for granted, no making excuses, got a lot to do.
So again, very similar workflow, which is set the controls just kind of generally where I think they should be, then flip the different modes and just hear what it sounds like.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it.
On this particular track, clear is sticking out to me. It just sounds the most natural. It sounds like the vocal is being brought forward in the mix in a really pleasant way. It doesn't sound harsh. So I think clear is the way to go. Generally, it's a good idea to also turn on the high pass filter. In this case, it's just kind of cleaning up anything that might be happening in those sub frequencies. All right, so far we've got dynamics and tone. Let's take a listen to where we're at.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking now.
Already we're miles ahead of where we started, and we got there super easily. The next thing I'm going to do is just use a little bit of de-essing. Now with de-essing, there's really one primary goal, which is just to tame the harshness of any sibilance that might be coming out. The reason I do it in this order is because sometimes adding air and high end can bring out some of that sibilance, and I want to be able to set my de-esser appropriately so that it handles it right. If I did the de-essing first, then boosted a bunch of air, I might have to go back and change the de-esser.
The way that you got me overthinking, how you act make me out. You take me for granted.
Here's a pretty good spot. We'll just loop it here.
You take me for granted. You take me for granted.
We just want to tame them, make them sound natural.
You take me for granted. You take me for granted. You take me for granted.
So what I really like about this de-esser is there's very granular feedback that shows you when it's working and how much it's working. So this DS meter here, you're going to start to see it come down on S's, T's, any kind of sibilant high frequency sound.
You take me for granted. You take me for granted. You take me for granted.
You can see as I start to push it really far, it's happening all the time.
You take me for granted.
Obviously that's too much de-esser. It's just starting to sound dull. If we don't have enough de-esser,
you take me for granted.
It's not hitting at all. So we just kind of set this until we see that de-esser start to, just come down a little bit on the S's and T's.
You take me for granted. You take me for granted.
So I'm just staying in the creative space here thinking, does this sound how it should? Or does it sound like it's poking out still? Or does it sound harsh? I'm just kind of setting it until it sounds natural.
You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do. You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do.
With the de-esser off at 0%.
You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do.
Especially on those S's, you really hear it. They're just poking through a lot.
Making excuses, got a lot. Making excuses, got a lot. Making excuses, got a lot to. Making excuses, got a lot to.
And that just cleans it right up, makes it super natural, super transparent. Sometimes you got to watch out with different de-essers. They might crunch or add little artifacts in there. With this one, it's going to sound super clean, super clear.
Making excuses, got a lot to do. Making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the roses. 'Cause they fade, our memories were made with you.
So let's move on to the next section here, which is going to be the space.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do. You make me want it.
So again, I'm just setting a natural amount of reverb and delay, and then I'm just going to try out different spaces.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the. You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now.
What I'm hearing is Dark Hall sounds really nice. It's very subtle. It just fills the space really nicely. And it just sounds really natural on this vocal.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act.
The reverb just sounds nice and lush, but it's not muddy. It's not muddying up the vocal. And that's because all of these spaces are specifically designed for vocals. When you pull up an all-purpose reverb, generally they're not set up to already be tuned for vocals. Chances are it's just kind of set up to be like a really nice sounding reverb that sounds good on everything. But with these reverbs, they're specifically tuned to work for vocals. So you're not going to get a ton of low-end build-up rumble that sometimes happens. These are all specifically crafted to take care of all that tweaking for you. So you're just kind of picking already, pre-tuned reverbs and delays.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it.
One thing that happens with reverb all the time for me is I usually overset it first, and then I have to kind of dial it back. You may not find that for you, but for me, I think it's pretty common to say overdo the reverb and then realize wait a minute, it's too washed out.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act.
So as you're going through and referencing other commercial mixes as you go, listen to how much reverb they have. Probably it's less than you might think.
You make me want it. The way that you got me.
Last up here, I'm going to decide if I want any SFX here. So maybe I want some doubling or thickening or a little chorus. Let's just play around with it.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell.
This analog chorus is really nice.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it.
Just a touch of it. That's really all you need, just to kind of thicken up this lead vocal. This particular vocal doesn't need a lot. Her voice is very full. This is just going to be a subtle lift to it.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out.
So now I've got my bass vocal setting. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. So I'm just going to call it the name of the song and lead.
The way that you got me.
Now, of course, immediately after you hit save on your preset, you're probably going to hear something and be like, oh, actually, I want to change something.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now.
Just tuck that back a little bit and overwrite. Now we've updated our preset.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it.
It's a good idea to also level match your preset a little bit. I'm going to do that with the output. You can kind of watch the meters and make sure they're roughly the same, input and output.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out.
Okay, so now I'm going to copy this over to all my leads here.
Say not to think about it. It's another moment. 'Cause I'm over waiting on you. If you knew I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through with keeping on.
There's a ton ton of background vocals here. I can probably sum them and then process them all together. And so that's what I'm kind of thinking about here is how do I want to do that? Do I want to do that in groups, like maybe these four together, these four together, or do I just want to lump them all together? Probably I don't want to lump them all together. I want to do it based on the section of the song. So here, these are all happening kind of in the chorus. So I'm just going to group these together, and let's call these chorus backgrounds. I guess we'll call these verse background. And let's just see what we're working with here. So I'll copy the same preset over to our background just as a starting point, since we've gotten it pretty close already.
Overthinking now.
It does really nicely. I'm just going to tweak it a little bit. The one thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to turn off the space on the background vocals, and I'm going to just kind of dial up my SFX a little differently here. I want to play around with a little bit more, maybe pitch widening.
Overthinking now. Want it all out. Not to do, 'cause I'm over the roses.
Yeah, it just adds a little bit of width and a little bit of body. I haven't started panning or anything yet, but when I do that, it'll continue to increase. That's a pretty good starting point. But you noticed I turned off the space module on the backgrounds, and that's because I actually want to set this up as a send track. In my DAW here, I'm going to create a new aux track. I'll set the input to, let's say, bus 3. That way I can just send different background vocals individually to this track. So for example, let's say we want to send backgrounds 1 through 4, and let's send that to this track here. Let's call this background space. Now here I'm going to load up a preset. I'm going to go down here to the space settings, and let's just play around with some of these presets.
Overthinking now. Want it all out.
Classic vocal plate's very nice.
Overthinking now. Overthinking now. Overthinking now.
Lexi's also pretty nice. I think this classic vocal plate is what I really like.
Overthinking now.
And maybe I want to add a little bit of chorus to it as well.
Overthinking now. Want it all out. Lot to do. Memories are made with you.
And I'm going to send these other ones here as well.
Overthinking now. Want it all out. You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the roses. 'Cause they fade, I won't remember.
One other thing I want to do is I want to make sure I save this as a new preset. Let's do background. So now we've got our background preset saved, we've got our lead preset saved, and then let's go ahead and save this as our background space. So now I'm going to set the level for the backgrounds and just kind of get them placed properly here.
On it, the way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you in or out. You take me for granted.
The production on this track is basically everything is double tracked. You can see like these two background vocals are the same part, they're just sung twice, 2 different times.
Thinking now.
So that way we can do these nice wide panning big background vocal sounds.
Thinking now.
Right, this is how you get that like massive wall of background vocals. Double track or triple or quadruple track everything, and then just pan things out, one left, one right.
Thinking now. Thinking now. Thinking now. Thinking now.
You can kind of fan it out a little bit. It doesn't always have to be pegged left and right. So the verse backgrounds are now panned out. They're feeling nice and full. It sounds like a good level overall. Let's go ahead and do the same thing down here in the chorus.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you.
So as I'm panning things out, I'm thinking I want to make sure it doesn't have a hole in the middle of it. At the same time, I want to make sure it sounds nice and wide and full. And so I'm panning some of them back a little bit just to make sure that there's not a hole in the center.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you.
So the last kind of setup piece we need to do is with these ad-libs. We can get a little creative with this processing. I'm really liking this telephone on it just a little bit, like 40% or so, just to kind of tuck it in a little bit, put it behind the lead. Let's copy that over to our other ad-lib track.
You make me want it, the way that you got me.
I'm tucking it in as well, level-wise here. So already in just a few minutes, we've gotten a basic mix set up. We've got the level set, panning, and some basic processing that'll give us a starting point. But now it's time to think a bit more creatively about where we want to take this mix. I'm just going to start listening from the intro, and as soon as I have an idea, I'll pause it and we'll figure out how to do it. That would sound really cool if it was all telephone effect. I'm going to duplicate this track and the processing on it and drag this down. Call this Xvox intro. I'm going to do the same thing for this, the ad-lib intro. We're going to call this ad-lib intro. Group these two together so that I can apply the same processing to them. So now I've got them together. I'm just going to put Xvox on this group and load up the telephone effect. I might still want some reverb on it as well. Now we're getting somewhere because now this vocal is kind of swirling around. It's got a really cool feel to it for the intro. Let's take a listen from the beginning. I just want to play around on the group now and play with the tone a little bit. I might want to warm it up just a little bit. So I'll switch over to the vintage mode, boost the lows a little. That's exactly what it needed. It just didn't have enough body to it. Just adding a little bit of tone here, fixed it right up. Listen before and after. Now it sounds nice and full. So we're going to call that our intro vox. So now we've got this really cool moment that happens in the intro. It kind of hooks you into the track. Let's keep going.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking.
This vocal could be a lot cooler. I'm just going to drag this down into ad-lib 3 and open up Xvox here. And let's go ahead and just crank the verb and the delay on this one.
You make me want it.
That's pretty cool. I'm actually going to load a second Xvox up.
You make me want. You make.
Ooh, the phaser, that's really cool. 'Cause now it has some motion as that's happening.
You make me want it.
That sounds really cool. I like that moment. In this verse, I want to make sure that we're filling up enough space. Give us a little bit more interest. It's going to fill some of those gaps.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking. make it now. Can tell that you want it.
These backgrounds that kind of come in just in this back half of the verse, they're sticking out a little bit too much, so I'm just going to pull them down just a tiny bit.
You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the roses.
And I want to bring up the reverb on all the backgrounds. Remember, we set that up here as the background space send.
You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the roses.
The backgrounds are feeling nice in the verse. The lead feels nice. So in this part here, the backgrounds are kind of poking out a little bit on this line.
8-hour memories were made with you. I hate them.
And it's just kind of crunching, and you can kind of see that the waveform is significantly bigger on just this line. Let's just clip gain these down so they're a little bit more in line with the rest. I'm just going to turn the gain down just on those clips.
8-hour memories were made with you. I hate the night. 8-hour.
Sometimes if there's just like one spot of a wave that is a little too loud, I like to just clip gain it down so it's not creating way too many tracks that we don't need. So here, the track really drops out. We need this vocal to fill up a lot of space in the arrangement. So I'm going to pull up, I think I'm going to change the reverb on this part.
I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through with keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone.
It went from kind of like dry and anemic sounding to super massive and just really full and lush sounding.
I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through with keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone.
Actually, as I'm going, I'm kind of realizing the entire track is a little quiet, and that could just be our vocals were kind of creeping up in level as we started mixing them more. Now we just kind of need to revisit what does it look like in balance with the track. I'm going to grab all of these vocal tracks here, turn them down so they're fitting with the beat better.
No making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the roses. 'Cause they fade, our memories were made with you. I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through with keeping all alone.
So these background vocals here, they're kind of a choir sound. I want to do something different with those as well, because those are almost like playing the role of an instrument in the track. They're trying to fill out and be this kind of pad sound. Let's give those their own processing and call it the pre-chorus backgrounds. We'll copy over our main processing here. Give these a different reverb, I think. I want to take the send off. And I want to thin them out a good bit more just so they're not overpowering. I flipped over to 2 because I just want a little bit of glue and warmth on this one. This dynamics mode just seems to really do that well for groups. It looks like there's a couple here that kind of kick in as well that should be with the rest, so let's just move those up.
I hate the nights when I'm alone. Baby, what you wanna do? I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through with keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone. Baby, what you wanna do? You say not to.
So these ad-libs, I also think now they need to be a little spacier as well.
Keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone. Keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone. Baby, what you wanna do?
So when the chorus hits, I kind of want this tail on these big reverbs that we've got to just cut off a little bit more. So let's just automate the space reverb level here. And I guess we should also do that for the delay.
Baby, what you wanna do?
So now it's nice and clean when those come back in. Sometimes it might sound cool with the reverb carrying on like that over a part. In this case, I just like it cutting off. This lead is a little stuffy sounding.
Baby, what you wanna do? Baby, what you wanna do?
Because it's happening over so many other vocals. So I think we should just cut some of the lows out, open it up a bit.
Baby, what you wanna do? You say not to think about it.
So here's a good example of where I might tweak the send amount. So on these first 4 background vocals, I think those can use a little bit less reverb overall. I'm noticing it here at this point, but as I think about it back in the verse, those could be a little bit less spacious there. So let's just take those down about 3 dB.
Baby, what you wanna do? You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry.
It also gives a little bit of contrast as you're going into the chorus to kind of let this background vocal be a little bit drier than this one. I just want it to feel nice and clean. I don't want to overpower it with reverb. I want the chorus to feel big, but in this particular track, it's not really that kind of wall of sound production. You know, it's got to have a little bit of bounce to it, and in order to have bounce, you got to have some air around the elements of the track.
I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you.
So I think these background vocals in the chorus are just a little bit loud. They're like right here with the lead. I'd rather them be just like kind of tucked underneath of it.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you.
I think actually what it is, it's just these fills that were a little bit loud. The main parts here were okay, but it's these ones that kind of come in and overlap some of the parts. Those were just a little bit distracting, so we're gonna tuck those in a little.
But all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. Won't waste another moment.
This is the perfect time to start comparing your mix to commercial mixes and really listen closely and say, does the lead sound bright enough? Does it sound too bright? Do the background vocals have enough body, or are they too thin, or maybe they're not thin enough? And as you start to compare to comparable commercial mixes, you'll start to figure out what you need to work on next. So in this case, I started listening and realizing, you know what, these background vocals are just a little bit too thick in the lows and the mids. I'm just going to pull them up here and just thin them out a little bit with the tone.
Not in the moment. If you're not with the things that I've been begging on you, 'cause to me it's in focus. If I'm blurry, oh baby, then you know what to do. 'Cause I don't wanna be an obligation. I don't wanna feel like you've been faking, but I don't wanna be the only one with something to lose, something to lose. I hate.
It just helps me get a little bit airier of a sound there on the background vocals. So far, we've got our vocal mix feeling really nice. The acapella is really good. So now let's talk about how it blends with the track, because we've got our acapella feeling really nice, but with the beat, we need to kind of fill this up a little bit more and give it a little bit more power. Not every beat would need this. In this case, the mix is pretty good on this beat. We just want to give it a little bit more punch. Let's go ahead and just play around with a couple things. First thing I'm going to do is just pull up an EQ. I'm going to just put a little high pass filter here, very low, like 20, 22 hertz, something like that, just to kind of clean up the lows. Then I just want to add a little bit of power to this beat. It's got a nice kick and 808 happening, but some of the body of it is missing a little bit. So let's just add a little bit back in here into the 200 to 500 range. Should feel a little bit fuller. Let's add a little bit of excitement back in as well. A little bit of bite. So when you want to add bite to a mix, generally somewhere in the 1 to 5K range is a good place to start. Again, we're making very subtle adjustments here. We're not going crazy. We're doing, 1.4 dB, broad strokes kind of adjustments. It just kind of brings it into focus a little bit more. And next, I want to add just a little bit of compression. Very tiny amount of parallel compression. So let's go over to the VCA. So with this compression setting, which is a bit of a slower attack, just a tiny little bit of gain reduction happening here. The threshold is set so that we're just getting like 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction. What you're going to notice is it's going to kind of add some punch to the overall track and just a little bit of excitement overall. Again, this is a subtle difference, but this combined with the EQ that we did is just adding a nice punch and glue to the overall mix. That kick hits just a little bit harder. Everything just kind of falls into place a little better. Everything's feeling right to me. Tonally, spatially, it's panned where I want it to be. Let's go on to the Mixbus. If you remember, I'd placed this limiter here just as kind of a placeholder. Before that, let's put a little EQ. Again, rolling off just the very low here. This is just going to clean up any sub-rumble frequencies that we don't need. And now I'm just going to kind of apply a general lift to the track in some of the highs and lows. As I'm listening, I'm constantly thinking, does everything feel right? Does everything sound like how I want it to sound in this record? In that case, I was like, oh, the chorus background vocals are a little loud. Let me just touch them back a little bit. So then I'm just going to pull up the limiter and just add a little bit more gain to it. I'm not trying to necessarily go full throttle master on this track right now. I'm just trying to get a good presentable mix bus on this thing. On some of the 808s that are hitting, we're getting a little bit of crunchiness in the limiter. This is something that, you can either decide, hey, I want this to be like super clean, and even if it's a little quieter, I want it to be super clean, no crunchiness. Just depends on what direction you want to take it into. If you wanted it to be super, super clean, then you might use something like a multiband compressor to tuck back the lows a little bit. And really all I'm doing here is just looking for a tiny bit of gain reduction. At the same time, I want to make sure I have a pretty fast attack on the lows. The reason for this is it's just going to kind of catch some of the peaks in just the super low frequencies, which is what's causing the limiter to kind of crunch when those hit. So just by taming those peaks back a little bit, we don't want to overdo it, just a tiny bit, it allows me to get a little bit louder on the master limiter here without crunchiness. Finally, another thing I might do is just a little bit of Mixbus compression, going back to this VCA here, and just kind of dial in a little bit. I can't tell if I really like that or not yet. It's very subtle. Again, very subtle at this point, but if we listen to the whole entire Mixbus chain, overall it's sounding pretty nice. So after I've got my Mixbus generally set up how I like it, now we're getting into kind of the final stages of putting this mix together. One of those stages is doing any level rides, automations, things that we want to have changed throughout the mix. So for example, on the lead vocals, I might just listen through it and draw in any automations where I think yeah, it could be a little smoother here. Maybe a word sticks out a little too much, or maybe it falls into the beat. Same thing with the background vocals. I'm just going to kind of listen through the track and make any adjustments that I think need to be there.
You make me want it.
So here I might just tuck this back a little bit.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking. You make me want it. You make me want it. You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now.
And this level of detail is really what separates kind of your good mix from your really, really great mix, is when everything is just perfectly in place and you just kind of keep combing through it, not overdoing it, but just making sure that everything is right where it needs to be. Same thing here. Let's just pull this up a little.
You make me want it. The way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out.
So here, this one kind of falls in. The background vocals come up, which is nice, and kind of hug around it, but there's a really nice inflection happening on this lead that I want to bring out.
Wonder if you're in or out.
It's just a little tiny detail that makes it feel fresh.
Wonder if you're in or out. You take me for granted. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You take me for granted.
Same thing here. All this emotion is captured in these little tiny moments in the vocal. I want to make sure we get all that.
In or out. You take me for granted. No, in or out. You take me for granted. In or out. You take me for granted. No making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the roses. 'Cause they fade out while memories were made with you. I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through while memories were made with you. I hate the nights when I'm alone. While memories were made with you. I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through with keeping all alone. I hate the nights when all memories were made with you. I hate the nights when I'm alone.
Just a little smoother transition into this section.
So made with you. I hate the nights when I'm alone. I'm through with keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone. Baby, what you wanna do? You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you.
So for this entire chorus, I actually think the vocal needs to kind of pick up a little bit in the lead. So I'm just going to grab everything on the chorus here.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to think about it,
especially in this little section here.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you.
Just bring up these little quiet spots so they're a little bit more even.
But all I do is think about you. But all I do is think about you. But all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. Won't waste another moment, nah, 'cause I'm over waiting on you. If you're not in the moment, if you're not with the things that I've been begging on you, 'cause to me it's in focus.
All right, so the background vocals here play a really critical part.
Cause I'm over waiting on you. On you, on you, on you. On you, on you. On you, on you.
So there we go. We've got a nice vocal ride throughout that all the leads now feel like they're tucked in nicely. At this point, the background vocals feel good. The track feels good. So now it's time to take a break from listening to it, because at this point, you've probably been working for a long time and listening to the track nonstop throughout that time. It's a great idea to take a step back, go do something else, and come back with fresh ears to pick out anything that you might have missed, anything that just sticks out as like, oh, I shouldn't have made that decision, or maybe everything's a little too bright, everything's a little too dark. It's not uncommon, even for the pros, to come back to a mix and realize it needs to be tweaked more. So don't beat yourself up if you come back and say, I need to spend more time on making sure the leads are the right brightness or making sure the track feels cohesive. Most likely, you're not going to get there all in one sitting. You kind of need to take a step back, come back with a fresh perspective. So I just took a break and I came back. I listened to some commercial reference records and compared them to what I've got here. It's feeling really overall very close, but I noticed that this mix is significantly duller, darker, and it just doesn't have quite as much hype and level as some of these other commercial mixes. So I'm going to show you now what I'm going to do to get it up to that level. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of brighten up the overall record a little bit. Now, if it was like really dark, I might go back into all the individual tracks and start bringing up the air on the vocals, playing around with the EQ on the 2-track. But this one, it's just a little bit too dark. It just needs to be brought up a little bit in the highs. And so I'm just going to go to the overall Mixbus here. I'm just going to go ahead and put this up right around like 13, 14K. Bring the slope down so that it's not, I don't want it to be like this, like super narrow. At the same time, I don't want it to be like this, super wide. All right, I just kind of want like something like this maybe.
You make me want it. The way you say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. Always another moment.
Nice, so as I'm doing this, I would flip back and forth between the commercial reference mixes and make sure that it's actually sounding how I want it to.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it.
At the same time, I need a little bit more overall squeeze on this entire thing. So I'm going to go to my multiband compressor on the Mixbus, and I'm just going to add a little bit of multiband compression to these upper bands.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. Always another moment, 'cause I'm over waiting on you. If you say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you.
My process here is basically turn down the threshold on the band until I start to see a little bit of gain reduction, and then just turn up the makeup gain until it feels like it's right. I don't want to go too hard. I don't want to go like tons of compression like this.
You say not to think about it.
So it just starts to sound like empty, thin. I just want a little bit.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. Always another moment, 'cause I'm over waiting on you. If you're not in the moment.
So I'm still not getting quite as much smack in the highs as some of these commercial references. So I'm going to go back to my track here, and I'm just going to add some highs in here, similar to what we did up here.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you.
Again, just flipping back and forth with commercial references and coming back and just listening more to what does it need? What does it have enough mids, highs, lows? Right now, I think it could use just a little bit more mids.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it.
So now I've gotten it to a point where I like it up against the commercial mixes. Now, I'm not trying to make it sound exactly like any one particular mix. I'm just trying to make it sound so that if it came up on the same playlist with these other tracks, it would feel like it fit in. It wouldn't feel like it stuck out as, super, super different. I just want it to kind of be in the same ballpark as these other mixes. So let's take one more listen where we started and where we ended up.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight
obviously a massive difference. And aside from Xvox, everything else, I just used stock plugins in the DAW. You can take what you saw here with these plugins and apply them to any DAW's stock plugins. But with Xvox, obviously there's a ton packed in here that it would take probably 10 different plugins just to kind of replicate what we've done in this session with Xvox. Another thing to note is we're using a ton of different instances of Xvox here, and not once did it choke or have any trouble from a CPU standpoint. We're running at pretty low buffers, 128. To be fair, this is a pretty powerful laptop, but it's not the most powerful laptop you can get. We weren't even close to using 20% of the CPU on this session. And we've got, 10 or 15 different instances of Xvox up.
You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you.
So that's how I would mix this track using Xvox. I hope that taking a look into my workflow has given you some ideas and inspiration for how you could approach your next mix. And I hope that you've picked up a lot of different little technical tips and tricks for how to go about mixing with Xvox. If you want more of this type of video, let me know. Leave a comment. Tell me what kind of styles and genres you want to see. Be sure to follow us for more videos and tips like this.
You make me want it, the way that you got me overthinking now. Can tell that you want it. How you act make me wonder if you're in or out. You take me for granted, no making excuses, got a lot to do. 'Cause I'm over the roses, 'cause they fade out while memories were made with you. I hate the nights when I'm alone, I'm through with keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone. Baby, what you wanna do? You say not to think about it, but all I do is think about you. You say not to worry about it, but all I do is worry about you. You know I try to fight it, but I never seem to win without you. I won't waste another moment, 'cause I'm over waiting on you. If you're not in the moment, if you're not with the things that I've been begging of you, 'cause to me it's in focus. If I'm blurry, oh baby, then you know what to do. 'Cause I don't wanna be an obligation, I don't wanna feel like you've been faking, but I don't wanna be the only one with something to lose, something to lose. I hate the nights when I'm alone, I'm through with keeping all alone. I hate the nights when I'm alone. Baby, what you want?